The sun dipped low over Ashwood Lake, casting amber streaks across the water as Daniel Whitman eased his kayak up to the old dock. It was a quiet piece of shoreline tucked behind a row of pine trees or spot he'd fished from since. He bought the property 6 years ago. It was peace. Until that afternoon. "Excuse me," a sharp voice called out. Daniel looked up to see a woman marching down the trail toward him, short blonde hair, clipboard in hand, lips pursed with self-importance. She didn't introduce herself. "You can't be here," she snapped, arms folded tightly. "This dock is for HOA members only, private access." Daniel blinked. "I live here." "That dock's on my land?" The woman scoffed. "No, sir. This entire lake perimeter falls under Lakeview HOA jurisdiction. The rules are very clear." He stood from his kayak, keeping his tone measured. "I'm not part of the HOA. My parcel was deeded before the HOA was ever formed. The shoreline from here to that pine is mine." She stepped forward, clipboard raised like a badge. "I'm Karen Reynolds. I'm the HOA president. And this dock is subject to common use regulations. I'm going to need you to remove your kayak and sign this citation." Daniel looked down at the citation slip she handed him. It had his name already printed on it. She'd come prepared. "I'm not signing anything," he said calmly, "and I suggest you check your maps." Karen's eyes narrowed, her voice rising just enough to carry over the breeze. "We've had trouble with non-compliant residents before. I'll be notifying the board." Daniel walked away, but her voice followed him. "Enjoy your lake access while it lasts." That night, Daniel sat in his small cabin-style home, flipping through his property survey and deed. His land did, in fact, extend 40 feet into the lake, confirmed, notarized, and grandfathered in long before Lakeview HOA was even formed. But it didn't matter to Karen. She wasn't enforcing rules, she was enforcing control. The next morning, Daniel found a bright orange notice zip-tied to his mailbox. HOA violation. Unauthorized use of common area. Fines pending. Wasn't even in their HOA. Neighbors started whispering. A few walked their dogs on the far trail just to avoid passing Daniel's home. Somehow, Karen had convinced others that Daniel was a problem, an outsider refusing to follow community guidelines. He'd lived here 6 years. Karen had moved in 8 months ago. And now she wanted his dock, his shoreline, and apparently his peace. But Daniel wasn't the kind to roll over. He picked up the violation notice, turned it over, and began writing a letter of his own. Daniel's pen moved slowly across the paper, each word a deliberate strike against the rising tension gripping Lakeview. He wasn't usually the letter-writing type, but if Karen wanted bureaucracy, she'd get it. His letter was addressed to the Lakeview HOA board, typed neatly with legal references attached. It cited property boundaries, recorded plats, and a reminder that his land had exemption status from any HOA control. He scanned the attachments again, deed records, county land service, and a highlighted boundary line stretching well into the lake. Satisfied, Daniel made copies and hand-delivered them to the HOA office drop box the next morning. By noon, Karen had posted a response on the community bulletin board. Due to confusion regarding lakefront property access, a temporary ban on shoreline use has been enacted. We urge residents not to interact with the disputed area until the board has clarified jurisdiction. Thank you for your cooperation. HOA President, Karen Reynolds. Daniel stood there staring at the notice, jaw tightening. She wasn't backing off. She was doubling down. That evening, Daniel returned to his dock. Not to fish, not to kayak, just to stand. Feet planted firmly on the wood his own hands had restored. The lake glimmered quietly. But behind that peace was a storm brewing. A soft crunch of footsteps made him turn. It was Angela, a neighbor from 3 lots over. She hesitated before approaching, glancing over her shoulder as if she'd snuck away. "I just wanted to say, I know you own this part of the lake," she said in a low voice. "Karen's twisting everything. She told people you were building a rental dock trying to commercialize it." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What?" Angela nodded, visibly uncomfortable. "She said you were planning to charge boat access to outsiders." that it'd bring crime. She's rallying people. Daniel exhaled slowly. Karen wasn't enforcing rules, she was planting rumors. Building a case in whispers, he thanked Angela. But his mind was already racing. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. Subject: cease and desist. HOA violation. Continued use of the disputed shoreline may result in legal action. HOA reserves the right to enforce compliance through fines, liens, or civil court proceedings. Dana laughed bitterly. The HOA had no power over him, but they were treating this like a siege. So he escalated. He scheduled a meeting with the county recorder's office, walked in with a folder under his arm, and requested a formal property line confirmation and official legal boundary clarification. The clerk nodded. We can issue an updated certification. Takes 5 to 7 business days. Daniel left the office with something more important than paperwork. Proof was coming. But so was trouble. That weekend, he caught 2 unfamiliar trucks parked on the grass near his property line. Men in fluorescent vests were measuring trees and placing small pink flags in the dirt. Daniel approached. Can I help you? One of the men looked up. Or ordered a private survey. We're marking potential shared access lines for a dock replacement project. Daniel's face darkened. This land isn't shared. You're trespassing. The man hesitated. Ma'am, who called said she had authority? Karen Reynolds. Daniel didn't shout. He simply pulled out his phone, took photos of the trucks, the flags, and the workers, and then he called the county sheriff's office. This is Daniel Whitman. I need to report unauthorized activity on private property. Karen wasn't expecting the deputy to show up. By Monday morning, word spread fast around Lakeview. The HOA's own private contractor had been escorted off Daniel's land by local law enforcement. Karen's story started to crack, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she called an emergency HOA board meeting, and this time, she brought in a local real estate lawyer. The letter Daniel received the next day was thicker than the rest. Not just fines, intent to pursue legal injunction. Daniel stood on his dock that night with his dog by his side, watching the lake ripple under a rising wind. This wasn't about a dock anymore. This was war, and Karen had just pushed it too far. The folding chairs were arranged in 3 uneven rows, each one facing a makeshift podium inside the HOA's rented community center. Fluorescent lights buzzed above, cutting harsh reflections across laminated agendas and cheap coffee cups. The sign on the door read, Emergency HOA Board Meeting, Property Enforcement Matters. Daniel hadn't planned on attending, but when a neighbor texted him a photo of the agenda with his name printed on it, he didn't have much choice. He walked in calmly, dressed in jeans and a button-down, holding a leather folder under one arm. Whispers followed him, like dry leaves, blowing behind his boots. Some neighbors looked away. Others nodded quietly. But all eyes eventually landed on the woman standing at the front of the room, Karen Reynolds. She was already speaking. And that's why we've moved forward with the injunction process. The board cannot allow private residents to weaponize property loopholes against the safety and harmony of our lake community. Daniel took a slow breath and raised his hand. Karen paused, lips tightening. Yes, she said, I'd like to respond. A murmur rippled through the room. Karen shifted. This isn't a courtroom, Mr. Whitman. Daniel nodded. No, it's not. But you've publicly accused me, tried to find me, sent surveyors onto my land without permission, and now you're trying to sue me. So I think I deserve 5 minutes. The board hesitated. Then an older man at the end, Steve, former president, before Karen took over, gave a quiet nod. Let him speak. Daniel stepped forward. My name is Daniel Whitman. I've lived on Lot 43 for 6 years. My property was originally deeded in 1982, before Lakeview HOA even existed. I have no contract with this association, and your authority doesn't apply to my land. Not legally, not ethically. He opened his folder, pulling out documents with flag tabs. This, he said, holding one up, is a county-filed survey showing that my property includes 40 feet of shoreline access. This, he flipped to the next, is a notarized exemption from horror jurisdiction filed with the original plat. And this, he turned one final page, is a formal notice of trespass filed with the sheriff's department after you sent contractors onto my land without consent. Karen's face was stone, but her fingers twitched around her clipboard. The room was silent except for Daniel's voice and the hum of the lights. I didn't want conflict. I came here to live quietly. But I won't be bullied off land I legally own because someone doesn't like that I use my own dock. He placed the folder gently on the board stable. You've turned this into a personal crusade. I suggest you end it before it becomes a legal one. Karen spoke slowly, her words dipped in poison. This isn't personal. This is about protecting the community. Daniel tilted his head. Then why did you tell neighbors I was building a commercial dock? No response. Why did you distribute a ban without a vote? No answer. He leaned forward just slightly. Why did you alter the community map to include my Shoreline 2 months after you moved in? Now Karen flinched. Gasps echoed around the room. Steve looked at the folder, then back to Karen. Is that true? Karen's voice was clipped. We were updating zoning overlays. Did you file it with the county? Daniel asked. More silence. Steve's tone changed. Karen, did you falsify boundary data? Karen's face hardened. You're all missing the point. No, Steve said. Standing now, I think we've just found it. The meeting erupted into side conversations. Several neighbors stood to look at Daniel's documents. A few shook his hand, one man a quiet, older gentleman named Mr. Bear clapped him gently on the shoulder and whispered, "Took guts. Glad you came." Karen stood stiffly behind her podium, watching the support shift away from her. But Daniel didn't stay to bask in it. He left quietly. Outside, the sky had darkened. The wind blew off the lake with a cool edge. Daniel walked to his truck, opened the door, and paused. There, tucked under his wiper, was a folded note. He opened it. You made a mistake challenging her. Watch your back. It wasn't signed. The note weighed heavier than its words. Daniel sat in his truck, staring at the handwriting as the engine idled. Block letters, no curves, no signature, not angry, just cold, precise. It could have been a bluff, just someone trying to scare him. But Daniel wasn't naive. He knew the difference between a petty neighbor and a personal vendetta. And Karen had just been publicly humiliated. The next morning, the first sign of retaliation came quietly. Daniel's trash can had been kicked over, contents scattered halfway down the road, a juvenile move. But what made it strange was how clean the rest of the neighborhood looked. No wind, no animals, and none of the other bins were touched. Only his. He didn't bother to pick it up right away. He took photos instead. Later that afternoon, his internet cut out. He called the provider, and after a long hold, the technician confirmed the request. Looks like your disconnection was scheduled by someone on your account. Says you're moving out. Daniel gritted his teeth. I never made the request. Reverse it. The rep hesitated. Sir, the order came with your name and service code. Daniel jotted down the timestamp. Call ID and agent name. The pieces were stacking quiet, hard to prove, but coordinated, and it had Karen's fingerprints all over it. 3 days passed. Karen stayed quiet. No more violations. No public declarations. No follow-up from the board. Daniel used the time wisely. He visited the county zoning office again and requested a public record of map alterations filed in the last year. He also made a copy of the meeting minutes and submitted a formal complaint about HOA overreach with the county ombudsman. The man behind the desk raised an eyebrow as he flipped through the stack of documents. You're not the first one to bring her up, he said quietly. But you're the most organized. Dana left with a folder full of leverage and a plan forming. But Karen wasn't done. On Friday morning, Daniel opened his front door to find 2 uniformed city code officers walking up his driveway. Morning, there. Got a report about unpermitted structures near the shoreline. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Structures? One of them gestured toward the dock. That's been there for a decade, Daniel replied. It's listed on the original property plans. The officers were polite, but firm. Just doing our job, sir. Someone submitted an anonymous complaint. We'll need to take some photos and verify with the city records. He let them do their job. They measured, clicked photos, and scribbled notes. As they were leaving, one of them leaned in slightly. Off the record, this happened often around here. Daniel exhaled. Only since Karen moved in. The officer nodded. Figured you'd be surprised how many neighborhoods have a Karen. By evening, a notice of pending violation was stapled to a post near Daniel's dock. Not a fine yet, but a threat of one. Daniel peeled it off, folded it neatly, and walked back to the house. That was when he saw her dog Karen, standing at the edge of her property across the narrow trail, arms crossed, watching him. Her mouth didn't move, just a stare. He held up the notice and gave her a slow, knowing nod, then went inside. That night, as Daniel reviewed his photos and scanned through his legal notes, a familiar ping hit his inbox. New message. Subject: confidential. Hoer Materid was from Steve, the former Hoer president. That you should know. Karen pushed for an emergency vote to override exemptions on pre-Hoa lots. Claimed it was legal, under amendment authority. I blocked it for now. But she's pushing hard. She's not stopping. Also, she asked the board for permission to access archived sale contracts. Claims she's looking for historical enforcement gaps. I think she's trying to find leverage. Daniel read it twice. Karen wasn't just trying to control the lake. She was digging into his past. That night, he pulled out the old safe under his closet floor and opened it. Inside were the original sale documents from when he bought the land. Every inspection, every title transfer, every record, and something else. A photocopy of a private site agreement from the developer. Something almost no one else in the community had. Daniel held the paper up to the light and smelled for the first time in weeks. She had no idea what she was walking into. Daniel hadn't looked at the paper in years. The corners were curled, the ink faded in spots, but the signature was there, bold and clean. Alan R. Becker, Founder. Becker Properties. The document was a rare one, a private agreement between Daniel and the original land developer. At the time of purchase, Becker had granted Daniel a perpetual easement, securing exclusive rights to not just the shoreline, but a 15-foot buffer beyond it for conservation and access purposes. It meant that, even if future zoning changed or HOA letters were created, Daniel's rights to the lakefront would stand untouched. Ironclad. No one else in the entire community had this clause, and Karen didn't know it existed. He scanned it, backed it up, then printed 3 new copies, one for the county, one for the ombudsman, and one for the HOA board. By the time Daniel delivered the documents, Karen had already made her next move. The Hoa newsletter, normally a boring bulletin about landscaping and speed bumps, now feature a bold headline: Community divided. Longtime resident accused of exploiting legal loopholes to evade horror responsibility. Beneath it, a photo of Daniel's dock taken from a distance, with a caption suggesting that it posed a safety hazard to the public. Daniel read it twice, his jaw tightening. It wasn't just war anymore. It was character assassination. That evening, Daniel received another knock on his door. This time it was Angela, the quiet neighbor who had warned him before. She stepped inside, hesitant. Karen's going door to door. She's got a petition to get the whole board to authorize a lawsuit against you. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And people are signing. Angela frowned. Some are scared of her, others don't want to get involved. But I thought you should know. She's telling people you forged your deed. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he reached over and handed her a copy of the developer's agreement. She read the heading and blinked. You have a permanent easement. He nodded. Angela smiled. The first real smile he'd seen from anyone around here in weeks. She's in trouble. 2 days later, Daniel requested an emergency meeting with the full horror board, just like Karen had done weeks earlier, but this time, he brought more than documents. He brought Alan Becker himself, the elderly developer, now retired and living at ROA, stepped into the community center like a ghost from the past. He had a cane in one hand and a leather folder in the other. "Karen Reynolds," he said from the front of the room, "you're attempting to override a private agreement signed by me, notarized by the county, and recorded before your HOA even existed. That's not only unethical, it's illegal." Karen's face drained of color. Steve glanced around the boardroom, unsure if he was watching a hearing or a reckoning. Becker continued, calmly but firmly, "Daniel Whitman owns that shoreline, and he doesn't owe your whore a single inch of it." He tapped his cane once against the floor. "Any attempt to encroach on his property can, and will, be prosecuted." Karen tried to recover. "We're not trying to encroach. We're trying to establish uniform community rules." Becker cut her off. "Uniformity doesn't override contractual law." Then Daniel stepped up beside him, placing copies of the easement on the table for each board member. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he said. "I'm asking to be left alone." For a moment, the room was still. Then Steve turned to the other board members. "I move that we drop all pending actions against Mr. Whitman and issue a formal letter of apology, effective immediately." A pause. The nod stopped. Karen didn't speak. She stared forward, blinking rapidly, as if she was finally seeing the consequences catch up. The meeting ended without fanfare. Becker shook Daniel's hand before leaving, and several neighbors approached to apologize, one by one. But Daniel didn't feel victorious. He felt watched as he walked home along the gravel path. He noticed something off. His dock gate latch had been tampered with, just slightly twisted. A message. She wasn't done yet, and she was about to cross a line she couldn't walk back from. It was just after 5:15 a.m. when Daniel heard the sound. Metal clanking against wood. Sharp and distinct, far too close to the house. Boomer, his dog, let out a low growl before scrambling to the sliding door. Daniel was already on his feet, grabbing the flashlight he kept by the kitchen sink. He slipped into his boots, without socks, and moved quickly onto the back porch. Mist drifted off the lake in curls. The air was quiet, but someone was out there. Then he saw the shape. A person crouched near the edge of the dock, fiddling with something at the base of the mooring post. Daniel stepped forward. "Hey," he shouted, voice echoing across the still water. The figure stood up fast. Thin build, dark hoodie, face obscured. They turned and sprinted down the dock toward the woods. Daniel gave chase, cutting across the grass barefoot, but by the time he reached the tree line, they were gone, disappeared into the brush like they knew every bend. He turned back. That's when he saw it. A gas can and a bundle of cloth tucked beneath the dock. He paused, knees bent, lifted the cloth, rag soaked in accelerant. By 6:10 a.m., Deputy Morales was back on the property, examining the gas can with gloves, while another deputy photographed everything. "This was deliberate," she said, standing. "Whoever it was, they came to damage something, maybe more." Daniel folded his arms. "Attempted arson, possibly," she replied, "or vandalism that could have escalated. We'll classify it as attempted criminal mischief for now." He didn't say what he was thinking, that if he hadn't heard the sound when he did, they might have set fire to the dock or worse, waited for him to be near it. Morales looked toward the woods. "We're reviewing your security footage now. Did you recognize anything?" Daniel shook his head. "To dark, hooded, they knew where the blind spots were." She nodded grimly. "Which means they've been here before." Later that day, Daniel received two unexpected visitors, Steve from the horror board, and Angela. Steve looked shaken. He held a copy of Daniel's incident report, recently submitted to the horror for records. Though Daniel knew Karen would have seen it too. "I'm really sorry," Steve said, standing by the porch steps. "We never meant for this to go that far. We thought this was about dock measurements, rule disagreements." Angela stepped forward. "She's lost control. Daniel, I overheard her on a call yesterday. She said you deserve to be taught a lesson." Daniel's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped. "She said that exactly." Angela nodded. Her tone was cold. I've never heard her speak like that before. Steve sighed. Some of the board members want to suspend her. There's going to be a vote. But Karen's already threatening legal retaliation. Daniel didn't say anything, just stared out toward the lake. They were finally realizing what he'd known for weeks. This wasn't about rules. This was about ego. About a woman who had built her identity on control and cracked when someone didn't bow the evening. Daniel reviewed the security footage again, frame by frame, second by second. At the 5:14 a.m. mark, just before the figure appeared, he noticed something strange. A vehicle's headlights briefly flickering through the trees. Pausing, then dimming, he rewound. Enhanced the brightness. The tail light shape was unmistakable. A silver Lexus SUV. Only 3 people. In Lakeview drove one, and only one of them had parked on the community board spot every Thursday morning at 6, always early. Always smug. Karen Reynolds. The next morning, Daniel didn't call the sheriff. He called his lawyer. This isn't just harassment anymore, he said. We have probable cause for attempted destruction of private property. I want to file for a protective order. His attorney paused on the other end. Are you sure you want to escalate this? Daniel looked out the window at his duck. She already dead. By mid-afternoon, Karen received the notice at her door. An official civil restraining order request had been filed, citing a string of property violations, threats, and circumstantial evidence placing her vehicle at the scene of an attempted act of sabotage. Karen didn't deny it. Instead, she exploded. She stormed into the horror board office later that day, slamming papers, shouting about conspiracies and a coordinated smear campaign. But in her fury, she didn't notice the board secretary recording the entire outburst on her phone. And that would become the turning point, the twist Daniel never saw coming. Because Karen's vendetta, it wasn't just about him. It was about something much deeper and darker that was about to be exposed. The video of Karen's meltdown spread like wildfire. It wasn't posted on social media, not yet, but within hours of her outburst at the horror office. The recording had been shared among nearly every household around Lakeview. The quiet, controlling president they'd all tolerated for months had finally pulled back her mask. In the video, Karen ranted about Daniel's defiance, about people being too stupid to follow order. And finally, she let slip a phrase that stopped Steve cold when he heard it. If he wins, we'll lose the entire Shoreline proposal. And that deal is already in motion. Those last words rang in Daniel's mind like a bell. Shoreline proposal. He hadn't heard anything about that. No notices, no ballots, no open meetings. He called Angela. You ever hear about a Shoreline development plan? He asked. She hesitated. No, why? Daniel explained the video. Her voice dropped. Wait, she said. Are you saying there's a private deal being made behind the board's back? Sounds like it. Daniel drove straight to the county clerk's office, heart pounding. He asked to search public development proposals and permits filed within the last 6 months. The clerk led him to a computer terminal and, within minutes, Daniel found it. Filed under a shell company named Redwood Holdings, LLC, was a preliminary permit request to rezone a section of the lake's East Shoreline for private marina access, including new docks, road access, and a small boathouse. The proposed zone, directly behind Daniel's land. More importantly, the application was signed by Karen Reynolds, listed as the project liaison. The date on the document, 3 weeks before she issued Daniel his first violation. It wasn't about him. It never had been. Karen didn't want his dock gone because it broke her rules. She wanted it gone because it blocked her development dealer's secret project she never told the community about. A deal that could only go through if she convinced the board that Daniel's property was technically common used. By turning him into a villain, she could clear the path to profit. And the kicker? Redwood Holdings LLC was registered to a trust tied to Karen's husband. It was all a setup. Daniel returned home and compiled everything: documents, video stills, emails, and the permit application. He emailed a packet to his lawyer, then a second one to the HOA board. Within 24 hours, an emergency meeting was scheduled. But this time, Daniel wasn't the only one with questions. Half the neighborhood showed up. Karen arrived last, her expression carefully composed. She took her seat at the board table as if nothing had changed. But then Steve stood up. "We have serious allegations to address," he began. "New evidence has emerged suggesting that President Reynolds acted unilaterally to pursue private Shoreline development without informing this board or the residents of Lakeview." Guests rose from the crowd. Karen interrupted. "This is a misunderstanding. The project is exploratory. Nothing has been finalized." Daniel stepped forward, papers in hand. "You filed permits using a shell company. You manipulated community maps to include my property. You've harassed me with fines and false violations, all to clear a path for personal financial gain." Karen's mask cracked. "That land should be ours," she snapped. "You're one man blocking progress for the entire community, Steve." Karen, you don't speak for the community. And you certainly don't get to benefit from it behind our backs. Then he turned to the crowd. "I motion to remove Karen Reynolds as HOA president effective immediately and launch an independent investigation into her use of authority." A second board member raised their hand. "I second the motion." All in favor? Hands went up, nearly every one of them. All opposed? Only Karen. And just like that, she was voted out. Karen stood, jaw trembling. "You're making a mistake." But Daniel stepped forward one last time. "No, you did." She stormed out. Hello, camera phones recording every step. Her reign over Lakeview was over. But Daniel knew the story wasn't quite finished, because there was still one thing she hadn't counted on. Karen Reynolds didn't return to the HOA boardroom. Not that week. Not that month. Her resignation wasn't just a neighborhood scandal, it became a matter of legal review. Daniel's attorney forwarded everything to the county ethics board. And within days, a quiet but firm investigation began into her abuse of power, misuse of community funds, and the concealed relationship between the whore and the shell company Redwood Holdings LLC. What few people knew until then was that Karen had been working on a multi-stage land use transfer, aiming to slowly absorb parts of the undeveloped Shoreline under community jurisdiction through zoning reclassifications. All of it required one thing: silence from the homeowners. Daniel had disrupted that silence. A few weeks later, Daniel received a certified letter, not from Karen, not from the whore, but from the county clerk's office. The Redwoods Holdings development permit officially revoked. The investigation had found multiple irregularities in the application, misrepresented boundaries, and disclosed conflicts of interest. And most damning, an attempted inclusion of Daniel's property as open news without any legal right to do so. The county dismissed the proposal with prejudice, meaning Karen and her husband couldn't refile under the same application ever again. Daniel stood on his dock that evening as the sun set, a letter of resolution in one hand, his dog Boomer resting quietly beside him. The lake, for the first time in months, felt like it belonged to him again. But the story didn't fade away. At the next full whore assembly, the board voted on a new president. Surprisingly, they nominated Angela, the same quiet neighbor who had once whispered warnings in the dark. She accepted the position with grace and a calm promise: no more secret agendas, no more weaponized violations, and no more pretending. A rulebook gives us power over each other. Applause filled the room. Some clapped for Angela, but others, especially the older residents, clapped because they finally felt heard again. The fear that Karen had used as a leash was gone. Daniel kept to himself after that. He restored the dock, repainted the edge posts, and even added a small bench overlooking the water. Neighbors stopped by now and then, bringing baked goods or stories or quiet thanks. He didn't ask for praise. He hadn't wanted a war. But when you're forced into a fight for what's rightfully yours, the quiet after is the only reward that matters. Then, one early Saturday morning, as Daniel prepared to launch his newly patched kayak into the water, he saw something across the lake. A silver Lexus SUV, parked just outside the Lakeview boundary, technically off private land. but clearly watching. Daniel didn't flinch. He picked up his phone and casually snapped a photo. He didn't call anyone. He didn't chase it. He just paddled out, one slow stroke at a time, into the center of his lake and let the morning fog close around him. Let her watch, if she wanted. Because the rules had changed. 1 week later, the sheriff's department called. Karen had been formally cited for trespassing and property interference related to the dock sabotage, though there wasn't enough to pursue full criminal charges. The restraining order Daniel had filed was approved, barring her from approaching him or his property for 5 years. She left town shortly after, moved in with her sister. Someone said, no forwarding address. Lakeview slowly healed. 1 month later, Daniel received a small envelope. No return address. Inside was a single photo, an old snapshot of the lake, before the houses, before the docks, just water, trees, and a handwritten note. Protect it. Not everyone wants to. He never found out who sent it. Maybe it was Becker, the old developer. Maybe it was someone who believed in what Daniel had done. Or maybe it was the lake itself, giving back in its own quiet way. Narrator's close. Daniel Whitman didn't fight for recognition. He didn't fight to prove a point. He fought because you shouldn't have to leave your own land to feel safe. Because someone waving a clipboard doesn't make them right. And because power only works if people are afraid to challenge it. Karen tried to kick him off the lake, but she didn't know he owned the shoreline. And now, he owns the truth.